let's pretend that the sun isn't currently setting at 4 p.m. and that it's not cold outside. And let's look back on August. August was genuinely a very good reading month for me. I think I have like 3 5-star books on the list that I'm about to show you, and I'm really excited to tell you about them because some of them, oh, they made me happy. August was a happy month. The first book on my list is probably one of the scariest books I've ever read. And I say that as someone who's been reading quite a lot of horror lately. Yeah, this was probably one of the scariest books I've ever read, and it's now a book I tell a lot of people about because it's very timely. The book is called The Heat Will Kill You First: Life and Death on a Scorched Planet. Yes, it is about climate change. And it's an extremely topical book. I believe this was published in July, so I read it like a few weeks after publication and literally finished it just basically when we found out that July 2023 had been the hottest month on record ever. And some of the first few days in August kept breaking their own records, being like, this is the hottest day ever. Whoops, this is the hottest day ever. So, and we just beat the record from 2 days ago. And now this is the hottest day ever. Now this is the hottest day ever. Not great. Not great for us. So how worried should we be? This book really lays it out for us, and I really appreciate how comprehensive of a book it was. So it talked not only about how do human beings tolerate heat, and we do not tolerate heat very well. We get severely dehydrated very quickly, and we have cell breakdown very quickly. One of the statistics or facts that I learned in this book that I'm now throwing at people is that most people who die of dehydration or of heat while outdoors are found with water on their person. Like they've been rationing water and didn't drink all of it. So as I told my friends while we were hiking, the water is better inside you than inside the bottle. Pretty sure that's a line from the book. And if you're going to retain any one thing from this video, if you live anywhere where you've been affected by the rising heat, aka pretty much anywhere on the planet, remember the water is better inside you than inside the water bottle. Stay hydrated. That's my PSA. Because we're not good with heat. The food we eat doesn't do great with heat either. All the different crops that we've been cultivating like certain temperatures. They don't like others. Even a small change in heat can literally collapse crops and livestock, and it's quite spooky. So what I loved about this book was that it used very recent data, including data from literally last year, 2022, and also kind of paralleled the world's response to COVID relative to the world's response to climate change. And it also talked about how, pathogens are a real threat. Like we saw what COVID, a relatively minor pathogen, all things considered, the devastation that it caused. And it talks about how we literally don't know what pathogens are going to suddenly be comfortable in the new climate. We don't. It's an added threat of impending doom. If you're interested in fiction on the matter, may I recommend my top book from last year, one of my favorite books from last year, How High We Go in the Dark, that I will always plug on this channel because it's amazing. But back to this book. We travel around the globe. We go to Antarctica, we go into Paris, we go to the Arctic, like Canadian Arctic, and we talk to a bunch of different scientists who are looking at climate change and its consequences from different lenses and different perspectives. I think the author did an incredible piece of investigative journalism here, and literally my only complaint about this book that I rated 5 stars and that I recommend to anybody who has remotely any interest in this topic, which to be fair should be everybody, but my only complaint is that all the temperatures were in Fahrenheit. How American-centric can you get, bro? You're the only country using Fahrenheit. Let's get Celsius in here. That was literally my only complaint. Otherwise, absolute 5-star. Please read this. The audiobook's incredible. The book is incredible, super topical. Throw it at people in your life. I'm a big advocate of throwing good books at people, and this is one I am currently metaphorically throwing at you. Please read this. So first book of the month, absolutely amazing. Second book of the month, I was still feeling the climate stuff. I picked up a climate fiction book. This book was sold as a combination of The Power and Station 11, two books that I really enjoyed. And it had climate fiction. I was like, this is going to be at least a 4 stars. I'm going to love it. Camp Zero was a 1-star book. It was a 1-star book. It'd be really funny if I could say Camp Zero was a 0-star book, but Goodreads doesn't allow for those ratings, and neither does my heart, because I think if you put in the effort to write a novel, you deserve at least 1 star. The reason this didn't get more was because this was a case of overpromising and underdelivering. And nothing frustrates me more than when that happens, because I thought that this would be one of my favorite books ever. It was climate fiction, it was post-apocalyptic survival, it had incredible themes of gender, race, class, technology, man versus nature, multiple plot lines. All the right ingredients for me to literally stay up all night and read this, and I didn't stay up all night and read this. Like, I'm kind of trying to mentally compromise with myself, being like, yeah, I guess the characters are like a little bit like YA characters, but it's okay because the plot is good, except it's kind of difficult to follow, except I guess... and I just couldn't find anything that didn't frustrate me about this book. Like, the social issues that are tackled in this book were tackled with the subtlety of an Instagram infographic, and just, I am not interested in that level of analysis. It's been done a million times, for lack of better words. The dialogue was very stiff, the character interactions felt forced and unrealistic, and I just really couldn't get into it. Like, the whole time I was reading it, I was just thinking of other books that this reminded me of that I would have preferred to be reading. That includes Parable of the Sower, which is one of the best near-future climate fiction pieces that I've ever read in my life. Another one is Good Morning Midnight, which also had that vibe of being stranded in the Arctic with possibly a small child running around, or Station 11 that was mentioned here, that was mentioned as being an inspiration behind this book, and Sea of Tranquility by the same author, who also like takes multiple plot points and multiple plots and like slots them in together really neatly. So Camp Zero was a disappointment, and I was really sad that it was a disappointment. And if you enjoyed it, I really want to know what you liked about it, because I couldn't. There was so much I wanted from this book, and I really wanted to like it, and I finished it because I really wanted to like it, and I'm trying to erase it from my brain because I'm sad that I read it. I wish I'd read something else. Basically, the time I devoted to this wasn't worth it, and I really don't like feeling that way about books. I really don't. A couple of months ago, I read one of the books that I think is going to be like in my top 5 or top 10 of the year, and that was Our Wives Under the Sea. So I was really happy that the short story collection by the same author, Salt Slow, which came out before the book, was actually good. Because a lot of the times with these debut novels, the short story collection that comes with it are like the short stories out of the MFA of the author, because that's how publishing works lately, I guess. And they're really hit or miss, but this collection was a real hit for me. That's largely because, like, I like stories about lonely, confused, sad women that make painful decisions about their close relationships. I like depictions of women as beast, women as wolf, women as the undead. I like creepy stories with really sweet characters that probably could kill you. And I really liked the general vibes and the writing in Our Wives Under the Sea, and I saw the roots of that in other stories in this collection, but without feeling like they were half-baked without feeling like they were half-baked versions of the book that followed the publication of the short story that I liked so much. So I really recommend this if you like sad girl fiction, I guess. If you like stories about women who fall in love with other women, sometimes men, who love beautiful things but are filled with loneliness. And this collection is amazing on audio. Like, I would just listen to it before bed, and it was like soothing and sad and aching and all those good things. All those vibes that I really needed at the time. So this was a solid 4 stars. There's nothing excessively memorable about it other than the way it made me feel. I remember really liking the way it made me feel, which was achingly sad. I have this tendency to read books that I don't fully understand. I think of myself as like a relatively smart person. I'm formally quite educated. So I'd like to think that I'm pretty smart, but sometimes books leave me like really not feeling that way, and this is one of them. I didn't fully understand the Iliac Crest, but I think I enjoyed it. Like, this is very much like a fever dream. It's written similar to the style of The Blind Owl, which I read a couple of months prior to this, or it kind of reminds me a little bit of like Milan Kundera or Anais Nin, writers I haven't read in a couple of years, but very no plot, just vibes, and a lot of exploration of certain themes. So a lot of the characters are unnamed, and there's certain like turns of phrases that appear. There's a lot of focus on bodies. Bodies are really analyzed and taken apart in this book in an abstract way, not in like a gory way. And the writing is really gorgeous, but very ephemeral. And this book really deals directly with a particular Mexican author who I didn't know anything about when I read the book. Her name's Amparo Davila, and she's a major named character in the book. So there's a lot of references to her work and to her and just to Mexican literature that I just culturally didn't have, and I feel like I would have enjoyed the book so much more if I had some grounding in that. So this is kind of like my own fault. Because the work can stand alone, but I feel like I missed out on so much of the richness. So this is something that I would want to revisit down the line, because I did find the book interesting. But like I said, there was a lot I just didn't get. So for now, I just settled it at like a 3 stars of like, I'm intrigued, but I don't fully get it. If you have strong thoughts about it, or if you want to explain it to me, that's what the comment box is for. All engagement is good engagement. Let's drive the YouTube traffic, as they say. For real though, I do recommend this if you're into like philosophical fiction, books where not much happens, but especially if you have knowledge of Amparo Davila, or if you're also just really interested in the ideas of deconstructing the body, because that's cool and weird and explored a lot here. I feel like everyone and their mother right now is reading Killers of the Flower Moon. I have had a copy of it for a while. Let me go get it. Huh. I got a copy of this, I think, like more than 5 years ago, and I'd been meaning to read it, and I never did. And I'm really glad that there's been like hype around it. I think the Goodreads Discord I'm in read it as a part of a book club, so I was like, you know what, it's time. It's time. This has been sitting too long. It details one of the first cases that the FBI ever tackled, and it really focuses on the victims of this case, which were the Osage people, who are still an indigenous tribe in the US. I'm really bad with US states, so I'm not going to try to guess which state in the US. I'm an ignorant Canadian, I'm sorry. One thing I really appreciated about this book is that it really portrayed the victims of the crimes as like fully dignified human beings, which was not a status that was actually afforded to them at the time. So there's a lot of information about not only who was killed, but like what were they like? What were the effects of their family? What are the after effects of their grandchildren and living relatives now? And I was really just impressed with how much the author actually like engaged with the population. So the story really didn't feel like it was told from necessarily from the perspective of the investigators or the FBI, but really felt like it was more told paying attention to the perspective of the community affected by the murders, basically. The motivation of the murders was not a motivation that I'm remotely interested in. I really struggle to stay engaged with anything that has to do with like heist or like money issues, undercover operations, all that kind of stuff. Like that's just not, it's not my vibe. Really not my vibe. So the second part of this book, it's divided into 3 parts, kind of like the first crimes, the investigation, and then the fallout. Parts 1 and 3 I really enjoyed because there was murder and focus on community, and there was focus on the fallout and current repercussions. But the investigation by the FBI, I literally couldn't care less. Like the whole crime aspect, I skimmed. Because it was just not my thing, and that's why I ended up giving this 4 stars, because it wasn't like life-changing for me, but I think that this book was written really well. So it's actually a 3.5 stars rounded up to a 4. I do recommend it if you like classic true crime. Like, it definitely reminded me of things like Devil in the White City and In Cold Blood. And I definitely also recommend it if you just have a general interest in the history of America's Indigenous people. This is like from the 1920s. If you're okay with a slow-paced book that walks you through nitty-gritty family trees, specific lives of specific people affected by the crimes, then you will absolutely love this. So this book is basically a retelling of a short story that the book quotes at the very beginning, and I hadn't read the short story before I read the book. So that's Pew by Catherine Lacey. And when I read it, I had no idea what was going on, but I was so impacted by it, and I couldn't tell you why. So this is the story of a character, a youngish character, like clearly underage, but otherwise age unclear, who is sleeping on a church pew, and the community realizes that they need to help this individual. So they take them in, can't really get any info about who this person is, where they come from, why they're sleeping on a church pew, and they're just kind of shuttled from family to family, and people are trying to figure out how to interact with this intruder into their like super religious community. So some characters do have like heartfelt one-on-ones with Pew, which is the name given to the child found on the church pew. But others have this very distinct, like, we are different from you, we are taking pity on you, but stay away. And all this is narrated in the week leading up to something very ominously referred to as capital T, the capital F festival. Tensions rise so much when we find out more about like what the festival is. We hear things of like, oh, you know, like there's always rumors, but don't be scared. It's not really that bad. And you're like, what's not that bad? Who are you gonna murder? Is like the general vibe. What sort of like human ritual sacrifice is this? As I was reading the book, it was really putting me in mind of The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. And I found that the way the tension mounted in this novella was really similar to that. But the ending of the novella made no sense to me. I didn't understand it. I just didn't understand the last few pages. Just the way it was written, I was really confused. I didn't know what was going on. I really like enjoyed the journey, so I was like, I don't know. So this was one of those books that really confused me, and I was like, oh, I'll probably give it a 3 stars. Turns out that the short story quoted at the beginning of the novella was actually important. It was an Ursula LeGuin short story that I'd briefly heard of but had never bothered reading, and my library had a digital copy, so I immediately went to read it. And once I did, this book went from like, oh, maybe 3 stars to like 5 stars, possibly one of my favorite books of the year. So the book Pew is in direct conversation with the ones who walk away from Omelas. And it absolutely shines when you view it from this light. So the story focuses on, like, the story of Pew, as well as Ursula Le Guin's novel, focuses on one very central question. If the happiness of everyone in a society can be maintained by just causing excruciating suffering to one person, one random person, is it worth it? Is it worth maintaining a sort of utopia if one child suffers? So Pew expands on these themes and asks some follow-up questions. Does it matter who the child is, how old they are, whether they're male or female? Does race matter? How? To who? In short, how do we actually like visualize the children that we're thinking of during this thought experiments? And we get very nuanced answers, which are yes, sometimes, depends to who, not always. And when viewed from this angle, when I started looking back at all the interactions that Pugh had had with characters in the novella, it was like you were getting like different philosophical manifestos. I loved it. I immediately want to reread it. I want to annotate it. I want to buy it so I can reread and annotate it. I want to enroll in an English class so that I can write an essay about this book and how it's in conversations with those who walk away from Omelas. So I highly recommend reading this alongside the LeGuin story. You'll definitely enjoy this if you've ever felt the like stifling, oppressive environment of organized religion, or have struggled with your own identity and are really interested in moral philosophy. And I cannot overemphasize how important it is to read the short story itself. And this was like a why didn't I read this in high school story. We had so much speculative fiction in high school. Like we studied 1984, Brave New World, some Kurt Vonnegut. And speculative fiction is basically my favorite genre. I love it. I love me some good speculative fiction. I mean, one of my favorite things about being an adult now who's reading is like I'm discovering all these speculative fiction authors that I didn't know anything about. Like I discovered Octavia Butler at the age of like 27. And I'll be annoyed that I didn't get to her earlier, but I'm also like, oh, this is great. And that's how I feel about LeGuin. And that's how I feel about this specific story. I feel like she was kept for me, and I feel like the story specifically was kept for me. And I was so delighted that I finally got to read it. So the thing with the story is I've already spoiled the plot for you. It's about a society where one child has to suffer for everyone else to be happy. But the plot isn't the point. Instead, there's ideas explored in the story, and it's only a few pages, but it's so rich with these ideas around class, race, colonialism, capitalism, morality, religion, selfishness, sacrifice, utilitarianism, compassion, responsibility. The story just plants a really interesting seed for a new angle of discussion of what is a perfect world, quote unquote. So if you are emotionally involved with the trolley problem and love some sapphic sci-fi, and feel like you've missed out on like the amazing female contributions to the genre, and enjoy being punched in the stomach by a short story, may I recommend this? And then follow it up by reading Pugh. Both 5 stars. Both just like highlights of my summer read. Just the collection of the two, I'm like, that was a lot. That was a lot, and it haunts me. And I love being haunted by fiction. There's nothing better. Okay, so that was like a really serious phase of August, and I was like, I need a palate cleanser. I need a really big palate cleanser. I've been reading a lot of serious stuff. And I was like, I need a rom-com. I really needed a rom-com, and I was just like, okay, let's go on Libby, audiobooks, romance, find me something cute. And I saw this cover and like, who hasn't fallen in love with someone on public transit? So I decided to read one last stop. And like the love interest, Jane, impeccable. I too am in love with Jane. Because who wouldn't fall in love with Jane on public transport? Seriously. The problem is the subway car of this book. To stretch the metaphor, the subway car goes off the rails. So I really liked the first third of the book. It was really cute. We followed our main character, whose name I don't even remember. Let's scroll up and find out. August. Right, her name was August. So we follow their main character from the book, August, who keeps running into Jane on the metro, on the subway. We are in New York, so it's a subway. August keeps running into Jane. August has recently moved to New York, feels very out of place. She doesn't have much family. She really just has her mother, who's been searching for her own lost brother, so Jane's uncle, ever since before not Jane's uncle, August's uncle. Wow. All right, rewind. August has moved to New York. She doesn't have much family. She's quite lonely. Her main family is her mother, who has been playing detective trying to find her own lost brother, that is August's uncle, ever since before August was born. And August is like, I need to come out from under my mother's shadow and become my own person. And she's like taking classes and gets a job in an old-timey restaurant. And then she meets Jane. And it's wholesome and fluffy and awkward, and there's some great subway flirting. It's adorable. And then you find out that there's some time travel involved. And who doesn't love a little bit of time travel? And of course, August's personal issues with her mom and lost uncle are also involved. And I won't spoil all of that for you, even though it doesn't it doesn't really constitute much of a mystery. But I gotta say, the first third of this book was really good, like a 4 star. Like, I was having a great time. It was wholesome, it was fluffy, it was a good palate cleanser from all the serious stuff I'd been reading. There was a lot of pining. I love some good pining. Okay, I don't read a lot of romance, but I can get behind a good pining. And some awkwardness and some good banter. But the banter got bad as we kept going. And the plot was just filled with so many conveniences. Like, at one point, there's literally a plot point where, like, we need 100,000 grand. Or, sorry, $100,000, which is 100 grand. Tired Canadian. And it's like, oh no, we need money. Good thing my grandmother, who I never mentioned before, has suddenly died and left me her inheritance. That actually happens. The world building in general just like wasn't very complex or interesting, like, or realistic. Like, August, our main character, never actually goes to school. She's literally never going to school. We have no idea what she's doing, but she somehow graduates anyway. She like skips work for weeks, lying about having mono, but also appears at her job because it's a diner and she goes to eat there, and somehow doesn't lose her job. So it was definitely like being in a romanticized version of reality rather than anything kind of real or more relatable, which, I mean, is fine for a time travel novel, but at the same time, it felt like it was supposed to be rooted in the present, and it just obviously wasn't because of these elements. But I kept reading because Jane was hot. That's easy. Um, but it really like didn't end up being enough to like make me actually overlook all the things that bothered me. I went into this book really looking for something similar to Nina LaCour. I've now like read pretty much everything she's written, and I love Nina LaCour so much, and I love the way she wrote romances and Everything Leads to You and Yerba Buena. So if you have recommendations for that, like cute romances along the lines of what Nina LaCour writes, and diametrically opposed from One Last Stop, please tell me. I'm actually kind of desperate because I don't know anyone else who writes things that will make my heart happy in that same way. If you want a rom-com where you don't have to think too much and you want to experience falling in love with someone on public transit and you're comfortable overlooking all that kind of weird narrative issues and are feeling hallmarky, this is the vibe. This is the vibe. It did get up 2 stars from me though, because all in all, I ended up being disappointed. Again, I need the Nina LaCour. Please, please. I'm starving over here. I was so spoiled in August with good books. This was another 5-star, Moon of the Crusted Snow. And there's a sequel that's come out. I'm so excited for it. Okay, because I think this was like after Camp Zero. I saw this summary of this book and I was like, it's either gonna get me out of the Camp Zero funk or make me really mad, because I have been longing for good climate fiction. And this hit the mark. It was incredible. I love good stories of like resilience, survival, community support, claustrophobia, where like the major apocalyptic stuff appears mostly off screen and the characters don't really know what's happening but need to deal with it. They know some sort of cataclysm is happening in the outside world and they don't know who to trust. They don't have reputable like news sources and they just need to deal with it. So Moon of the Crusted Snow follows an Anishinaabe community in northern Canada, and we don't really know what happens to like modern society. We just know that the power grids go down, the communication grids go down, and the community typically gets like trucks coming with food and fuel and medicine that are brought into the community every couple days, every couple weeks. All that stops coming. So they're suddenly cut off from the rest of the world, and as far as they know, the rest of the world has descended into chaos. This is actually confirmed a little later, but I won't spoil that too much. So they're left to fend for themselves in northern Canada with a harsh winter approaching. And then, as any good story starts, a stranger comes to town. Other than a stranger coming to town, this is kind of a nothing happens, lots of vibes book. But it worked so amazingly and was so like, I'm at a loss for words. I loved this book so much. Because not a lot happens plot-wise, the exploration of culture and the intricacies of the community are explored quite deeply. And this familiar premise just becomes like a really good backdrop for exploring tensions between like traditional customs that have kept this community alive through very harsh weather and the comforts of modernity. And thinking about isolation versus thinking about communal care, and thinking about alpha male survivalism, pew pew, lots of guns, I will be the best, versus communal, let's try to help each other and assume the best kind of post-apocalyptic survival vibes. So it just explored these tensions in an absolutely amazing way. I really recommend this, especially if you're interested in Anishinaabe culture specifically, and you like what I like to call the soft post-apocalyptic genre that focuses less on the disaster and focuses more on humanity, and as well as the costs and rewards of survival in a post-apocalyptic setting. The sequel's out. I can't wait to read it. I can't wait. And then a book I got from the library was also a 5-star read. Look at the amount of 5-star reads I had in August. Isn't this amazing? So that book was Let the Old Dreams Die, which I have to say has incredible marketing, because it says it has a sequel to Let the Right One In, which you may have seen the movie of. And the book is very good. If you haven't read the book, you should go do that. So the sequel to Let the Right One In is in this collection. It's at the very end. And because I'm a completionist, I was like, well, I need to read the other stories. It doesn't work otherwise. And the other stories, I didn't even like realize this until I read the afterword. They all feature some kind of like Lovecraftian, pan-dimensional void horror. Like demons, trolls, sea creatures seeking revenge, all that kind of stuff. But the stories are written so well, and the author is so good at exploring human relationships within this like horror and supernatural context that I didn't notice. I legitimately just didn't notice. The prose was so beautiful and so grounded in like Nordic and Swedish life, which is also just lovely to read about. I'm reading my review, and like my favorite stories were things about someone who worked at airport security and was really good at telling when other people were smuggling something. The sequel to Let the Right One In, I thought it was very sweet. A story about a marriage falling apart. I guess like a few of the stories were about that. Also a story about a leaning apartment building that continues leaning more and more as the day progresses. Like just 1 or 2 degrees, but it just keeps going. Bloop, 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 bloop. The one where the husband almost drowns and there's an unborn baby. I enjoyed that one a lot. And then there was one where a woman finds a corpse in a locked room for a house she's house sitting for. And when she comes back, the corpse has covered himself with a blanket. And that's just the premise of the story. That's just the start. You see where I'm going with this? Like, there's not a lot of skips in this collection. Like, the few skips that there were like shorter stories that felt more like writing exercises. But like, I forgive, because the stories that weren't skips were so weird, so original, so good, and so memorable. Like, this was a 4.5 stars rounded up, and the only reason it wasn't 5 stars is, like I've said, there were a few stories that were like, eh, but I loved it. And if you haven't read Let the Right One In, go read that right now. It's amazing, emotional, but also horrific vampire horror. If you have read it and you liked his writing, Let the Old Dreams Die is really good. Like, this is a really, really good this is a really, really good collection of horror stories. I can't wait to read more of his books. If you've read any of them and you have a particular one that I should start with that isn't this or Let the Right One In, please tell me. My library has like basically all of them. And I don't know where to start, but I am so excited because yeah, this is great. I love some good horror. I love finding good horror with lots of heart. What a good August. What a good August. And I was scared for a lot of it because a lot of what I read was serious and scary, and I had a few disappointments, but it was a really good August. Just in general, my summer reads, I'm very happy with them. I'm thinking of them very fondly. It's going to be really difficult to pick like top books of 2023 or whatever. That's actually going to be impossible because it'll really depend on what perspective. And like this month alone has like 4 contenders. Easy. It's like multiple contenders. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. I've asked for a couple of different recommendations throughout the video because I need them. Do I? My TBR is almost 300 books long right now. It's a little bit of a nightmare, but I read about 10 books a month, so it'll only take me 30 months, right? That's fine. That's fine. That's normal. Yeah, please leave me a little something in the comments. It's good for the engagement, and as always, thanks for watching. I hope you read a really great book sometime soon and that you have a great rest of your day. Okay, bye.